Plain Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Rob Port. Later in the show, going to have an interview with David Owen. Now, David was one of the organizers behind Measure 3 in North Dakota on the 2018 ballot. Measure 3, of course, was a ballot measure to legalize recreational marijuana. Now, that measure lost in 2018. But what a lot of opponents said is, hey, this measure is not good. Give us a chance to make some progress towards, if not legalizing marijuana, at least decriminalizing it during the 2019 legislative session. Now, those efforts were spearheaded by State Representative Shannon Roars-Jones, who has been critical of the process. The bill actually failed last week. From the time when this podcast is being published, the bill actually failed. And Representative Roars-Jones has been critical of the process around it. You'll hear David and I discuss this. You'll also hear David talk about his group saying that while they were pretty much decided on not having another initiated measure, in fact, they actually let legalizeND.com, which was the domain they were using for their campaign, they actually let the domain expire. The website's on there no more. They're now very much going to have another initiated measure. So you'll hear us talk about that. But before we get there, there's a lot of consternation in the country right now about tax refunds. Of course, it's tax season since we turned over into a new year, and we've all got until April 15th or whatever whatever the deadline is this year. I haven't looked specifically to get our taxes done and maybe get a refund from the government, maybe have to pay a little bit in. We don't know. But it's interesting because there's a lot of furor among the public about refunds that aren't measuring up. There's been a lot of reporting about this. Let me read you something that's pretty typical. This is from the Los Angeles Times. I quote, "The average tax refund so far has fallen from $2,640 from $3,169 at the comparable time last year, according to the Internal Revenue Service data through February 15th. The number of returns that qualified for refunds was down 26.5% compared with last year, and the amount of money refunded was down 38.8%, the data showed. The IRS has processed 6.6 fewer returns compared with last year because of the partial government shutdown." Now, basically what they're saying is, well, so far, fewer people are getting refunds, and the people who are getting refunds are getting smaller refunds. But here's the thing about the tax code, and this is something that has frustrated me about the American system of income tax for a long, long time. What happens is, and I'm sure you all know this, or maybe you don't, because a lot of people don't seem to understand how this works, but throughout the year, the federal government withholds money from your paycheck, or actually your employer withholds it and remits it to the federal government. And what is withheld is based on the things that you fill out, that you tell your employer, that you tell the federal government about, like how many dependents you have and things like that. And then that's the basis for your withholding, which is, of course, is also calculated based on how much money you make, and the federal government withholds it. And then when you file your tax return is a reflection of your actual financial situation, how much you actually got paid during the course of a given year. And also, what sort of deductions you can take. If you're taking a mortgage deduction, maybe you bought a vehicle that, qualifies for some tax credit, or you put solar panels on your roof, or all those other crazy deductions and credits and everything that are embedded in our hugely complex and Byzantine tax code. So you do all that, and then what happens is you get your actual, how much you should have paid. And a lot of years, in fact, so often that most people just come to expect a tax refund, the federal government gives you some of your money back. What the Trump tax cuts have done, right? Because everybody's saying, well, I got a smaller refund, or I didn't get a refund at all, so how in the world is this a tax cut? What the Trump's tax cuts have actually done is they made a number of changes to the way that whole process works. Some deductions were eliminated, the tax code was streamlined, and effectively, you are paying less in taxes. The thing, though, is that instead of seeing that tax reduction reflected in a bigger refund at the end of the year, your tax reduction is reflected in the fact that less money is taken from you in the first place. So what's happening is that Americans are getting a tax cut because the amount of money that they're allowed to keep is bigger, but what's happening is they're not getting such a big refund at the end of the year, and so they feel like it's a tax hike. This is also from the LA Times article. I quote, "Howard Gleckman, senior fellow at the left-leaning Urban Brookings Tax Policy Center, think tank said taxpayers could feel shortchanged even if they actually ended up paying less in taxes in 2018 than the year before. If people judge the tax law by, quote, the refund and not the total tax you pay, and the refund is lower than what you got last year, it stands to reason you're going to be unhappy, he said. Now, a lot of people, myself included, have always tried to, adjust our withholdings and adjust our tax situation so that at the end of the year, we are essentially, I either have to pay in a little bit or I get a little bit back. But I've always tried to leave my tax situation there because I'd rather keep my money. I don't want my money to go off to the federal government and have them keep it for a while and then cut me a big check at the end of the year. I don't want that. I just want to keep more of my money, right? I'll pay my taxes. They are what they are. We can all have a debate about what tax, how much in taxes we should pay and what the federal government should be doing and the national debt and the deficit and all that not so fun stuff. But generally, my taxes are, once we've established what my tax rate is going to be, I would just as soon let the government take what it's actually owed and not a whole bunch extra that they're then going to give back to me at the end of the year. There's other things I could use that money for. I can, spend it on things that I want. I could spend it on things that I need. I could invest it. I could save it. I could put it towards my kids' college fund. I could do all sorts of different things with it. I can't do any of those things if the government has it. Or I guess I could at the end of the year, but you know what? I would just as soon keep it. But the problem is and this is something that I've said for years, the fundamental misunderstanding that most Americans have about the tax code is that they don't actually know how much in federal taxes that they pay. And if you don't believe me, ask people, right? Ask them. What was your tax liability last year? They probably can't tell you. They could probably tell you what their refund was. They could probably tell you how much they got back from the government, and they could probably tell you the vacation they paid for it, or the new laptop they bought with it, or the new phone they bought with it, or whatever it is they did with their refund. They can tell you that, but what they can't tell you is how much their actual liability was. And I think that's kind of a problem, because the refund is not really what we should be worried about. The refund is a reflection of how much extra the government gave to you and then had to give back. You don't want a big refund necessarily. What you want is to really have nothing happen at the end of the year. That's what you would want. It's just you don't owe anything. They don't owe you anything. You just got to keep all your money, and they only took what they were entitled to. But what you really ought to be concerned about, if we're talking about, if we're going to have a public policy debate, is how much you actually paid in taxes. That is the number that I wish more Americans knew. I wish more Americans knew how much the federal government cost them. And really, I wish our tax code was organized in such a way that number was more apparent. Because, listen, we all know what our car insurance costs us. We all know what the electric bill is going to be, approximately in any given month. We all know what our cell phone bill is going to be. But how much the government costs us, despite the fact that we spend all of this time, right? We spend countless hours and hours of our lives, watching news shows and listening to politicians and listening to think tanks and pundits and everybody else, and we're having this nonstop debate because I'm not degrading this thing, that we live in a participatory form of government, and so this endless debate we have is a function of that. It's a good thing. It's a part of all that. But the thing is we're having this endless debate about how big government should be, and should government do this, should it not do this, and how much does it cost, and what our taxes should be, in an environment where most of us don't actually know what the government's costing us. And I'm not even just talking about the federal government, right? Because it's not just the federal income tax, right? It's Social Security that comes out, it's Medicare and Medicaid, all those other things that come out of your paycheck, and then it's local taxes, sales taxes, property taxes, maybe there's a local income tax where you live, all the different things that we pay, we don't really understand because it's hidden from us in a lot of ways. It's not easily quantifiable. Wouldn't it be great if we just got a bill in the mail for government? Wouldn't that be something? I mean, Verizon does it. All sorts of other companies do it all the time, right? National, I don't know how many people still subscribe to magazines, but once upon a time, you subscribed to a magazine, they sent you a bill every month. It happened all the time. I mean, and why can't the government just send you a bill in the mail every month Say, this is your share of the federal government. You know, and then we could do all sorts of fun stuff with that bill. We could maybe put line items in it. If it's the federal government, you know, maybe we have a line item in there and say, this is how much the military cost us, or the Department of Defense. This is how much the Social Security Administration cost us. You know, you could drill it down. Maybe we could put it online. You could log in with your bill and see, like an item, like you do with your cell phone bill, where you're going through and you're seeing all the different text messages and phone calls and everything. You could log in and see what your share of all the different of the federal highway system is, if you really wanted to. Wouldn't that be great if we could understand that? Wouldn't it be great as if if we're debating a particular policy, like maybe we're saying, oh, we want to spend more money on the highways, and this is the effect it's going to have on your government bill that you're going to get every month. Wouldn't that be great? And people will say, oh, but it would be so hard to enforce. You know, what if people just didn't want to pay or whatever? Well, I don't know. We already spend billions of dollars on the IRS. We already spend all sorts of money on enforcement. You're telling me the federal government couldn't enforce? You don't show up at your door if you don't pay your monthly federal government bill? You're telling me we couldn't do that? And if the federal government could do it, then why couldn't the states do it? Why couldn't the local governments do it? Right? I mean, you already get a bill in the mail for your water and your sewer and your gas and your trash collection. Why not do that in other ways? Wouldn't that be a more transparent way of doing it if we all understood how much our government actually cost us? Because right now we clearly don't. Again, going back to this debate, I mean, the Trump tax cuts for about 80% of American households lowered tax burdens. People are going to pay less in 2018 than they did in 2017, but they don't feel like they did because their refund is smaller. Meaning they don't really understand what their federal tax burden was to begin with. And I think it would be a better country if they did understand that. It would be a better country if they did understand what their government cost us. I think we could have a more informed sort of debate. It doesn't mean your attitude about, you know, how much we spend on schools or how much we spend on highways or police or fire protection or the military or any of the other things that government does. It doesn't mean your attitudes or philosophies about that have to change. It just means that you would understand what all this is costing you. But I think there's a reason for people who promote the status quo to be very, very afraid of that. Because if we were better informed about what government cost us, I think a lot of us would be maybe a little bit more reticent to go rah-rah and cheer for that latest government program some politician is hawking if we knew that, hey, all of a sudden our bills are going to go up because of it. By the way, another function of us all getting a bill in the mail from the government, like Netflix, you know, getting a Netflix is another company that does this. Millions and millions of subscribers across the country subscribe to Netflix. Netflix is able to send everybody a bill. I don't see what the big deal is. Why can't the federal government do it? But suffice it to say that, you know, maybe if we all got a bill in the mail, maybe the federal government would also have to live within its means. If we understood that maybe that was a line item on the bill too, is this is also your share of the national debt. I think that would be a better place to live. It's probably not going to happen for all the reasons I just explained because, you know, who in the government has an interest in being transparent about what the cost of government is to the public? I don't think Democrats want that. I don't think Republicans want it either. I don't think very few people in Washington would want that. But gosh, it would sure be better, wouldn't it? That's it for today's rant. My interview with David Owen coming up next. This episode of the Plain Talk Podcast is brought to you by Energy of North Dakota. Oil and natural gas from North Dakota strengthens all of America. And through our abundance of talents, innovations, and technologies, energy responsibly produced here translates to worldwide economic stability. With producers and our communities working together, we're securing a sustainable future that generation after generation can build on. It's all happening right now with Energy of North Dakota. Learn more at energyofnorthdakota.com. David Owen joins me. Now, David was in charge, or one of the people in charge. It was sort of a grassroots volunteer effort. So there was a lot of people in charge, a lot of people helping out. But David, perhaps one of the most visible, was a part of the Measure 3 campaign here in North Dakota from 2018. Now, Measure 3, if it had passed, would have made recreational marijuana legal. It also would have had an expungement provision about past records. But suffice it to say, it would have made marijuana legal. Now, during the debate in 2018, there was a state lawmaker, a Republican from Fargo by the name of Shannon Roars-Jones, who said she was going to introduce decriminalization a decriminalization bill to essentially not legalize recreational marijuana, but to make it so that if you were caught with it, you wouldn't necessarily be charged with a crime. Now, Measure 3 failed on the ballot, and by a wide margin, and now we're in the 2019 legislative session. We just reached last week, we just reached the crossover point, which is where the House has finished going through all their bills and the Senate has finished going through all their bills, and the two chambers exchange the bills that they've passed so that they can each debate each other's bills. Now, the second to last bill to be debated was Representative Royce Jones' decriminalization bill. It did not pass. It was defeated by a very narrow margin. And then the House Majority Leader, Chet Pollard, who is an opponent to decriminalization, he is an opponent to legalization, put what's called a capper on the bill at the end, and the capper essentially made it so that the bill couldn't be brought back for reconsideration, which is actually if you watch the proceedings of the legislature, is a pretty usual thing, where a lot of times a bill that was either passed or defeated by a close margin will a lot of times be brought back for reconsideration. Essentially, House Majority Leader Pollard made that impossible. Now, I have heard Shannon Norris-Jones has spoken in the media saying that she felt that the process was a little bit unfair. I have heard from supporters of decriminalization who are saying that they feel like they were sandbagged by the process. And in fact, one of them is David Owen, who obviously joins me now. David, how are you?
I'm doing good. How are you doing, Rob?
Pretty good. You were in the chamber when the decriminalization bill went down. Tell me, what'd you see?
Well, I was in the hearings before that. I wasn't in the chamber when it went down,
okay.
But I was there for all the hearings. And so let me tell you, the process really starts of the messing with us from the first day of session. So Shannon Norris-Jones, true to her word, said that she would file for a decrim bill, and she did so. She did so on the first day of session. Now, normally that means the bill is going to get heard fairly quickly. It's going to be heard in mid-January, certainly not early to mid-February. To put it in perspective, our hearings for this bill were much later than the hearings for the medical marijuana bills, which were introduced later. So they intentionally moved it basically to the very end of session. Once we get there, compared to all the other hearings, usually if there's a lot of testimony, they don't cap you. They don't say you only have this much time and this is all you're getting. But Chairman Koppelman decided that we would have a total of 15 minutes of pro testimony, 15 minutes of against testimony, and that was it. They weren't going to hear any more testimony. They were busy. So Shannon gave her presentation of the bill. That takes about 5 minutes. I went up and testified, kind of describing why Legalize ND would support decriminalization. And then a woman who's a rape survivor talked about how she uses marijuana, and in her marijuana use, it helps her with her issues and the trauma and the issues she has associated with that. I believe as part of the sexual assault, she had spinal damage. And Chairman Koppelman was incredibly rude to her. He kept interrupting her. He said, this isn't about the medical marijuana. You shouldn't be talking about medical marijuana. Completely dismissive of the woman. And then the Attorney General's office came up, said, yes, we support this. There are a couple flaws with it. The Attorney General Stenton does support it. We can make it work. And that was the end. So over a 17-minute time span, there were two other people there that didn't get to testify that wanted to because of the concerns of the time crunch. And then we kind of go on our merry way. And it doesn't get put into committee work. It gets delayed in committee work, delayed in committee work, delayed into committee work until basically the last day of committee work. They then have a chance to, propose amendments. And 2 or 3 shock amendments come out of nowhere at the very end of that committee work session. Thankfully, they get put down. And then it gets put on the calendar. So now we're getting really close to the end of session, but there's still enough time where there should have been a day or two based on the calendar scheduling. But it gets delayed again. And so it gets pushed to literally the last day of session. I think it was either the last or second to last vote of the session. And then the cloture is invoked, or I think it's called clamping, is invoked to kill any changing of minds or any further votes. And so that's the whole process. And I felt really cheated by this, personally. A lot of my activists felt cheated by this. The poor woman who had to deal with how rude Representative Koppelman was to her felt cheated by this. And yeah, that was how it went down.
So why do you feel cheated by the process? I mean, some might. Obviously, you didn't get the outcome you wanted on the floor vote, and I should say I support decriminalization. In fact, I would rather have full on legalization, but I support decriminalization as a step towards in the right direction. So it wasn't the outcome that I wanted either. But how do you feel cheated by the process specifically? I mean, so some people might just say, well, a majority of the elected representatives of the legislature were against it. You know?
I don't feel cheated by how the vote went down, to be clear. I feel cheated by how Koppelman treated us during testimony, how it was scheduled, how it was moved around, and how it was treated unlike any other bill through any of the other committee hearings that I've gone to this session. I have gone to 7 different committee hearings this session. None of them were run that way. And also, in his committee, he didn't do that to any other bill. The civil asset forfeiture bill was given 5 hours of testimony. Our bill was given 15 minutes for. It was very clear that he didn't care what any of us had to say. He had made up his mind, and he was going to ram this through, basically delay it, and put it in on the last day to not give it any chance or shake. And for a bill filed that early, that's not how the process is supposed to work. It's supposed to be once a bill is filed, it's scheduled for a committee hearing, fairly short afterwards. The committee is supposed to listen to all the testimony for, all the testimony against. Then they're supposed to start working on it. Then they're supposed to feed it to the chamber. Then there's supposed to be a vote, and the cards fall where they do. But the fact that it got delayed and delayed and delayed, and then we were given no time to present testimony, was indicative of people that did not want to listen and people that didn't want to give the bill a fair shake from the get-go.
What's interesting to me is it's not like sometimes you'll see a committee chairman be dismissive of a bill that clearly just doesn't have a chance. The legislature, I mean, they have a ton. In fact, they had a record-setting number of bills down there. They have a lot of stuff to get through. I can understand not wanting to spend hours and hours on a bill, a piece of legislation that just doesn't have a chance. It's just this out of the blue thing. Nobody's going to vote for it, or very few people are going to vote for it. I could get that. But this bill came to the House floor, and it was a narrow vote. I mean, it was a very, very close vote, indicating that this was a controversial issue that could have probably benefited from a more rigorous committee process. I think that's what you're arguing.
Yeah, well, not only that, Rob, but keep in mind, they knew this bill was going to be close because the Rick Becker bill last time got about 37 on the similar subject. So this bill already had a history of gaining momentum through the legislature. So it wasn't just maybe I underestimated how controversial this bill was, its chances. They could look to the past and show that support had gradually been growing for this policy over time. And if this were a 13-0 bill, do not pass, I'd understand. Because I'll quote Corey Mock, because I get along with him. He said, "You don't try and fix stuff that's going to get killed anyway."
Yeah, and that's fair, and that was the point that I was making. If it was a bill that had a snowball's chance in hell, but this wasn't that bill. This is obviously, there is a market, so to say, for this in the legislature and in the public, I think, and they just didn't hit it. Now, speaking of that, I think anybody who follows my work knows I am not a fan of the initiated measure process. Now, it exists, so I will support initiated measures when I think they're good policies or the right thing. But generally, I think bringing things to the ballot box is not a good way to make policy. That being said, when I make that argument, undermining it, to me, is when the legislature behaves like this, where they're dismissive of an issue. You know, part of you can argue against the initiated measure process by saying, well, bring it to the legislature, right? And we have a very open process and everything else. This didn't look like we were fulfilling our duty to have an open process.
No, to give a bill like this only one hearing is shameful. Most bills, and I think North Dakota needs to reform its hearing process in the first place, but most bills should get 2 or 3 hearings, especially when they're complicated, when they're dealing with a bunch of different ideas, when they're dealing with other century code and other statutes. And even if you go by North Dakota standards, this was not given the time or respect it deserved. And on the initiated ballot measure process, the biggest problem with why initiated measures end up having problems is because citizens are not given access to legislative counsel. That's why there are so many problems when initiated measures get complained about as bad policy or unexpected outcomes. It's because we don't have access to legislative counsel.
Well, I'm not sure it's good to like amend our Constitution through a vote of voters who a lot of the time have not spent, or even amending statute for that matter, voters who haven't spent. And my intent here is not to debate the initiated measure process with you, but I just don't think in general the electorate can be mercurial, can be distracted. And I just think we need a better, more rigorous process for that. I would rather err on the side of it being frustrating and us not getting the policies through as quickly as we wanted than having the problems associated with the initiated measure process. That being said, it exists. We're not here to debate that. And now that the legislature has acted, David, you had told me before the interview that there was a chance you folks weren't going to put another recreational marijuana measure on the ballot, but you're thinking you're going to again.
Well, we know we're going to now. And it wasn't just a chance. It was a strong probability. I want you to try and go to legalizeND.com right now. Just go ahead and do it. So if you have a computer next to you, and you'll find you can't at 404s. We had decided not to renew the domain because if this decrim bill passed, it was going to be close enough, and it showed that we could work with them and move through legalization towards the legislature. We could move through it. And at the end of the day, once again, just like they did with medical, they showed they have no interest in having an adult conversation about marijuana. Because this isn't a legalized ND bill, Rob. This was a bill supported by Attorney General Wayne Stenjum, by former Judge Bob Weefald, who, for the record, campaigned rigorously against recreational marijuana.
I remember.
This was, well, I don't know if your listeners do, so I want to make that clear. This was done by Shannon Roars Jones, who's a Republican attorney, and a former sheriff who's a current legislator, spoke in favor of this bill.
Yeah, Representative Pat Hyder.
This bill had literally everybody across the spectrum, the entire criminal justice side and the people arguing for legalization. Everyone kind of went, you know what, we can agree on this. And it still got killed.
Yeah. It's frustrating. So tell me, and I realize, I mean, this is early going. I mean, you just this last week, we got the outcome from the legislature. If you put this issue on the ballot again, is it going to be identical to last time? Or...
No.
Okay.
It's going to be a little different.
Okay.
We're going to have grow limits of some description. We're going to have possession limits of some description. We're going to have a licensing program of some description. We're going to have an official excise tax, as much as I hate it, it's going to be there, of some description. And we're not going to deal with the records. Probably.
Do you think that'll be enough to address some of the concerns that were brought up last time?
Well, I think that's all the concerns that were brought up last time. Beyond the marijuana bad people.
There's still a lot of those people out there,
you're never going to get regardless.
Yeah, I mean, there's still. If you listen to that floor testimony over Shannon Roars Jones' bill, there's still a lot of those people in the legislature. I would argue, based on the feedback I get when I write about marijuana issues, there's still a lot of those people in the public.
Well, Rob, all I can tell you is when I went to all the marijuana hearings, including the decrim bill, there was not a single person there who was against any of the bills.
Yeah.
When it came for testimony. Not one.
What do you make of the argument? And you certainly heard this from a lot of the opponents during the floor debate. Is basically the people spoke. Measure 3 went down in flames. That was the people speaking. What business does the legislature have passing a decriminalization bill? And I suppose they could also argue, what business do you have putting this issue on the ballot again?
Well, one, it's our constitutional right to put it on the ballot again. 2, people's minds change as for future on the ballot. And I'll point to multiple things I've gone on the ballot quite a few times. There's been abortion bills on the ballot since forever. I think this was one of the rare times where we didn't have an abortion bill on the ballot in the North Dakota voting history. So that argument doesn't hold a lot of water with me, that just because people said no in 2018, they'll say no in 2020. On to the legislature. Decrim is not legalization. And if you listen to the entire opposition's major talking points, they repeated, you don't have to vote for Measure 3. You can vote for it. You can vote us back in, and we will fix it via decriminalization. Shannon Norris-Jones said that, and she followed through. We said it multiple times. Basically, the opposition came around to the fact and they said, look, we're not against decriminalization. We're not against this, that, or the other thing. We're just against legalization. So as far as the opposition was concerned, they were two different issues. And when your opponent is willing to say that they are so different that he being the opponent in this case, supports the other policy, there is a clear divide there.
David, thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me, Rob.
That's it for today's Plain Talk podcast. Thanks as always for listening. Remember, new episodes come out Monday through Friday. And if you want to subscribe to the podcast, there's a lot of great ways to do it. If you go to sayanythingblog.com, click on the Plain Talk podcast link, you'll see the links to Spotify, Pocket Casts, iTunes, all the different places. Or really, if you're already using a podcasting platform, or maybe you search one of the app stores or something and you find one, you should be able to find me in there. Just search for Plain Talk with Rob Port. If for whatever reason you're having trouble finding it, you've got questions for our regular guests, Congressman Armstrong or Senator Kramer, or you just want to give some feedback on the show, at any time you can email Rob at sayanythingblog.com, and I'm always happy to help. And hey, if you just want to say hi, you can just do that too, because I like it when people say hi. Thanks for listening. We'll talk again.